The city pulsed with a rhythm that didn't care if you kept up. Neon signs flickered above greasy diners, their pink and blue glow smearing across wet asphalt like spilled paint. Steam curled from manhole covers, twisting into the evening air, mingling with the distant wail of police sirens and the muffled thump of hip-hop leaking from a passing car's cracked window. Downtown was alive, but not in a way that made you feel welcome. People moved fast suits rushing from glass towers, tourists snapping selfies by food trucks, delivery bikes slicing through crowds like they owned the lanes. No one looked down. No one looked back. And no one ever noticed the boy slipping along the edges, a shadow among shadows. Jayden Carter was 16, black, skinny, and dressed in layers of mismatched clothes he'd scavenged from thrift bins or traded for with odd jobs. His hoodie, 2 sizes too big, hung loose over his frame, its sleeves frayed at the cuffs. His sneakers, once white, now gray, and splitting at the toes, slapped softly against the pavement as he moved. A small backpack, faded and patched, clung to one shoulder. Inside were his only possessions, a crumpled photo of his mom, her smile, frozen from years ago, a cracked plastic water bottle, a half-empty pack of gum, and a few napkins folded neatly as if they were worth something. To Jayden they were dud. It was just past 6, and the sun had already vanished behind the city's jagged skyline of high-rises. The air carried a damp chill, the kind that promised rain before midnight. Jayden stood outside a convenience store on Jefferson Street, his breath fogging faintly as he watched the world through the glass. Inside, a clerk scanned energy drinks for a man in a suit who tapped his phone impatiently. A woman in scrubs grabbed a coffee, her eyes glued to a text. They all had somewhere to be, something to hold onto: phones, bags, keys. Jayden wondered what it felt like to have a destination. He hadn't known that feeling in 3 years. Not since the hospital room where his mom's hand went cold in his, her laughter silenced by a cancer no one could afford to fight. His dad? Gone before Jayden could form a memory of him. After his mom, there'd been a foster home, then a group facility with too many kids and too few beds. Jayden had lasted 6 months before slipping out one night, choosing the streets over fists and locked doors. He knew how to survive now. Stay invisible, move quiet, trust no one. The city didn't give second chances, and Jayden didn't ask for them. He scanned the sidewalk, eyes sharp for cops or anyone who looked too interested. His stomach growled, a low reminder of the apple core he'd eaten at noon. He turned down the alley behind Lynn's Vietnamese bakery, a narrow strip of cracked concrete flanked by overflowing dumpsters and graffiti-scarred walls. Lynn, the owner, was one of the few who didn't chase him off. Sometimes she left a bag of day-old bread by the back door, her way of helping without making it feel like charity. Jayden didn't know her last name, but he knew her kindness came with no strings. That was rare. He crouched by the dumpster, using his sleeve to lift the lid, careful to avoid the security camera's lazy sweep. The smell hit him: rotting lettuce, stale coffee grounds, but he was used to it. Beneath a torn plastic bag, he found what he'd hoped for: a small loaf of white bread, still wrapped, only slightly squashed. He checked it under the alleys. Dim light, sniffed it, and gave a faint smile. It would do. He tucked it into his backpack, zipping it shut just as a sound stopped him cold. A soft, hiccuping sob, barely louder than the hum of the city. It came from behind a stack of flattened cardboard boxes near the back fence. Jayden froze, his hand still on the zipper. Instinct screamed at him to run. Strangers meant trouble, and trouble could mean cops, questions, or worse. But the sound came again, smaller this time, like something breaking. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. In the shadows, he saw her. She was curled up on the concrete, knees pressed to her chest, head resting against the bricks. Her dress, once pink, now brown with dirt and grime, hung loose on her tiny frame. Scratches and bruises marked her arms, some fresh, some fading. Her hair, thick and curly, was matted into clumps, and her bare feet were swollen, scraped raw. But it was her eyes that held Jayden still. They stared straight ahead, glassy and unseeing, fixed on nothing. She didn't flinch as he stepped closer. Didn't even move. "Hey," he said, voice low, careful not to startle her. Nothing. He edged forward, crouching to her level. "You okay?" The girl stirred, her head tilting slightly toward his voice, but her eyes stayed blank. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she said, her voice small, like it was something she'd rehearsed. Jayden felt a tightness in his chest. He lowered himself to the ground, the bread still in his hand. "Fair enough," he said. "I'm Jayden. Not a stranger now, right?" She didn't answer, but her fingers curled tighter around the edge of a cardboard box, knuckles pale against her skin. Jayden studied her, taking in the way her legs trembled, the way her breath came in short, uneven puffs. She wasn't new to this alley. She'd been here a while. Her feet told him that, and so did the way she sat, like she was trying to disappear. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. Jayden opened his backpack. Inside was a brown paper bag he'd gotten earlier from a church volunteer near the overpass, a turkey sandwich, still soft when it was handed to him. He'd been saving it, planning to make it last 2 days. But now, he reached in, unwrapped it carefully, and held it out to her. She sniffed the air, her hand shaking as she reached forward. When she took it, the way she bit into it broke something in him. She didn't gulp or tear at it. She held it close, chewing slowly, like she was afraid it might vanish. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Sophie," she whispered, barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. "That's a nice name." He paused, leaned back against the cold brick wall. "You live around here?" She shook her head, her fingers still clutching the sandwich. "I don't know where I am." Jayden nodded slowly, taking a bite of the bread he'd found. It was stale, gritty, but it filled the hollow in his stomach. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city kept moving. Sirens blared somewhere. A man shouted into a phone as he passed the alley's mouth. But in this forgotten corner, the world felt still. Jayden watched Sophie, her small frame hunched over the food, and wondered how she'd ended up here. He knew better than to ask too much. Silence had its own language when he spoke fluently. When Sophie began to shiver, Jayden stood. "My place isn't far," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Not much, but it's dry. You don't have to come if you don't want. I'll stay here with you, if that's better." She turned her head slightly toward him, her blank eyes searching for something her ears could find. Then she nodded, just once. Jayden helped her stand, guiding her small hand into his. Her fingers were cold, fragile, but they gripped him with a trust that made his chest ache. They walked together through the side streets, ducking past graffiti-covered walls and rusted fences. Cars roared by, their headlights slicing through the gathering dusk, but no one looked. No one ever did. Behind a gas station, through a gap, in a chain-link fence, was Jayden's home, a lean-to of plywood and tarps wedged against a brick wall. Inside was a thin blanket, a milk crate for a seat, and a battery-powered lantern hanging from a nail. He clicked it on, a soft yellow glow, pushing back the shadows. "Watch your step," he said, helping Sophie over a cracked board. He settled her on the crate, draping the blanket over her shoulders, and sat beside her on the cold ground. Outside, the city roared on, bright and indifferent. But in this small pocket of forgotten pavement, the night slowed down. For the first time in years, Jayden felt something shift inside him, a flicker of purpose, faint but real. He glanced at Sophie, her head bowed under the blanket, and wondered what kind of story had brought her here. Whatever it was, he knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Not tonight. The alley behind Lynn's Vietnamese bakery was a world apart from the city's neon pulse. A narrow vein of shadow and silence where the air smelled of damp cardboard and yesterday's bread. Jayden Carter sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, his back against the brick wall, watching the little girl he'd just met. Sophie Miller, she'd said, her voice barely a whisper, like she was afraid the wind might steal it. She was 7, maybe 8, curled up under his thin blanket, her small hands still clutching the turkey sandwich he'd given her. Her pink dress, now a patchwork of dirt and soot, hung loose on her frame, and her bare feet, scraped and swollen, peeked out from the blanket's edge. Her eyes cloudy, unseeing, stared at nothing, but her head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to the world's heartbeat. Jayden chewed slowly on the stale loaf he'd pulled from the dumpster, its gritty texture sticking to his teeth. His stomach still growled, but he didn't care. The sandwich was the only decent food he'd had all week, and he'd handed it over without a second thought. Something about the way Sophie ate slow, deliberate, like she was savoring a dream made it impossible to do anything else. He studied her now, taking in the bruises on her arms, the matted curls framing her face. She wasn't just lost, she'd been through something. He knew that look, the way the body curled inward, guarding itself. He'd worn it himself 3 years ago, after his mom's funeral, when the world stopped making sense. "You warm enough?" he asked, his voice low, careful not to break the fragile quiet between them. Sophie nodded faintly, her fingers tightening around the sandwich's wrapper. "It's nice," she said, her voice hoarse but soft. "The blanket." Jayden managed a small smile, though she couldn't see it. "Good. It's not much, but it's dry." He glanced around his makeshift shelter, a lean-to of plywood and tarps tucked against a brick wall behind a gas station. The roof, patched with duct tape, sagged under the weight of last week's rain, and the ground was hard, dusted with gravel. A milk crate sat in one corner, his only furniture, and a battery-powered lantern hung from a nail, casting a faint yellow glow. It wasn't a home, not really, but it was his. He'd built it piece by piece, scavenging materials from construction, sites and alleys, creating a space where the city's noise couldn't reach. Now, sharing it with Sophie felt strange, like letting someone read a secret he hadn't meant to write. "Why are you here?" Sophie asked suddenly, her head tilting toward him. Her eyes didn't move, but her voice carried a quiet curiosity, like she was testing the air. Jayden paused, the bread halfway to his mouth. He wasn't used to questions. Most people didn't care enough to ask, and he didn't care enough to answer. But Sophie's voice was different, small, but real. "Just passing through," he said, keeping it light. "What about you? How'd you end up in this alley?" Her lips pressed together, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a whisper, she said, "I was at the park with Michael. He was supposed to watch me, but someone came. They took me somewhere. I ran. I don't know how I got here." Jayden's chest tightened. "Took her?" The words hung heavy, stirring questions he didn't want to ask yet. A park, a caretaker named Michael, someone taking her, didn't add up. Not for a kid like this, blind and alone. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're safe now," he said, meaning it. "We'll figure it out." Sophie didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed slightly, like his words had loosened a knot inside her. She took another bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly, and Jayden watched, his own hunger forgotten. He thought about his mom, how she'd always shared her plate with him, even when they had nothing but canned soup and crackers. "You don't owe nobody your kindness," she told him once, her voice warm despite the chemo's toll. "But you give it anyway. That's what makes you you." He hadn't understood then, but now, Sitting with Sophie, he felt at a pull to do something, even if it cost him. "You want water?" he asked, reaching for his backpack. He pulled out his cracked plastic bottle, half full from a fountain near the library. Sophie nodded, and he guided it to her hands, careful not to spill. She drank in small sips, her fingers trembling around the bottle. "Thanks," she said, handing it back. Her voice was stronger now, less like a ghost's. "You're nice." Jayden chuckled softly, the sound surprising him. "Don't tell nobody. I got a reputation to keep." Sophie's lips twitched, almost a smile, and for a moment, the alley didn't feel so cold. Jayden leaned back against the wall, the lantern's glow flickering across his face. He didn't push her to talk more. Silence was safer sometimes, and he knew it better than most. But as the minutes passed, he noticed her shivering again, her small body huddling deeper into the blanket. "Hey," he said, an idea sparking. "You want a story? My mom used to tell me stories when I couldn't sleep." Sophie turned her head toward him, her unseeing eyes searching his voice. "What kind?" Jayden thought for a second, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Oh, okay," he said, letting out a slow breath. "Once, there was a girl who could see the world with her ears. Not her eyes, but her ears. She could hear the way leaves danced when the wind was happy, or how a dog's tail sounded different when it was scared. She heard colors, too red was loud like a drum and blue was soft like a whisper. She got lost one day, far from home, in a place where nobody knew her name. But she wasn't scared, 'cause she could hear the world telling her which way to go. And someone found her someone who'd been invisible his whole life. He didn't have much, no map or money, but he had ears too. And he promised to stay with her until she wasn't lost anymore." Sophie's hands relaxed around the blanket, her breathing slowing. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jayden smiled, soft and tired. "I'm still figuring out the ending." She didn't answer, but her head tilted against the milk crate, her body sinking into the blanket. Jayden watched as her eyelids fluttered, then closed, her breaths evening out into sleep. He clicked off the lantern to save the battery, letting darkness wrap around them. Outside, the city hummed tires, splashed through puddles. A distant radio played a song he didn't know, but in here, it was quiet. Just him, Sophie, and the faint patter of rain starting to tap against the tarp roof. Jayden pulled his knees to his chest, his hoodie damp from the alley's chill. He should sleep, he knew that. Tomorrow would be another day of scavenging, dodging cops, staying alive. But his mind wouldn't settle. Sophie's words echoed. "Someone took me. Who? Why? And how had she ended up here? 10 miles from any park, blind and alone." He thought about leaving her with Lynn in the morning, letting someone else handle it. The bakery owner would know what to do, maybe call someone official. But the idea twisted in his gut. Official meant questions, forms, people who'd look at him like he was trouble. And Sophie, she trusted him, her small hand gripping his like he was her only anchor. He couldn't just walk away. He glanced at her sleeping form, the blanket rising and falling with her breaths. For the first time in years, he felt something heavier than survival, a responsibility, fragile but real. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting go of her hand. Not yet. The rain had started in earnest by the time Jayden Carter stepped out of his lean-to, Sophie Miller clinging to his back like a small, shivering shadow. The city's pulse hadn't slowed. Headlights sliced through the drizzle, horns blared, and the neon glow of downtown smeared across the wet pavement. But for Jayden, the world had narrowed to the weight of the 7-year-old girl on his shoulders and the flicker of a news report he'd seen an hour ago. Sophie's face, cleaner and smiling, had flashed across a dusty TV screen in a phone repair shop, her name scrolling beneath. Sophie Miller, missing since Tuesday from West End Park. The anchor's voice had mentioned a reward, but Jayden hadn't. Lingered for details. All he'd caught was the address, West End, 10 miles west, and that was enough. Sophie needed to go home. He adjusted her weight. Her thin arms wrapped around his neck, her cheek pressed against his damp hoodie. The tarp. He'd draped over her, scavenged from a dumpster earlier, crinkled with each step, a makeshift shield against the rain. His own clothes, frayed hoodie, jeans clinging to his legs, were soaked through, but he didn't care. Sophie's bare feet, tucked against his sides, were cold as ice, and he'd rather take the chill himself than let her feel it. His sneakers, already splitting at the toes, squelched with every stride, the right one now torn wide open, letting water seep into his sock. He ignored it, focusing on the road ahead. The decision to move had come fast, sparked by the TV report and Sophie's quiet confession in the shelter. Someone took me. Jayden hadn't pressed her for more. She'd clammed up after that, her voice trembling, but the words gnawed at him. Whoever had taken her, whatever had happened, she didn't belong in an alley behind a gas station. She belonged somewhere warm, with people who'd look for her. And Jayden, for reasons he couldn't fully name, felt like the only one who could get her there. The first mile was familiar territory, crumbling sidewalks, graffiti-scarred walls, the hum of a mechanic shop firing up its engines. Jayden stuck to the shadows, avoiding the main streets where cops patrolled and streetlights exposed too much. Sophie was quiet, her breathing uneven against his neck, but she didn't complain. He'd offered to carry her after she went stepping on broken glass in the alley, and she'd climbed onto his back without hesitation, her small voice asking, "Will it hurt you?" He'd shaken his head, even though his shoulders already ached from hunger and cold. "Hold tight, okay?" he said, his voice steady despite the rain stinging his face. Sophie nodded, her grip tightening. "Are we going to my dad?" "Yeah," Jayden said, piecing together what she'd told him in the shelter. "Your dad's out there, looking for you. We just gotta get to West End." He didn't mention the 10 miles, or the fact that he had no money for a bus, no phone for directions, no coat to keep them dry. He'd memorized the cross streets from a map he'd glimpsed at a laundromat earlier, tacked to a wall behind a soap machine. The woman there, kind but distracted, had let him study it without asking questions. 10 miles west, through industrial zones and strip malls, to a place he'd never seen but could picture. A house with lights, a family waiting. Sophie deserved that the second mile brought trouble. A group of teens lounged under a flickering street lamp, hoods up, passing a vape pen. One of them, a tall kid with a scar over his eyebrow, spotted Jayden and called out, "Yo, what's with the kid on your back? You babysitting now?" Jayden kept his head down, quickening his pace. "Just passing through," he muttered, his voice low. The group laughed, but the scarred kid stepped closer, blocking the sidewalk. "Hold up, man. Where are you rushing to in this rain? Got something worth sharing?" Jayden's heart raced, but he forced his face to stay calm. He'd dealt with types like this before, guys who pushed because they could. "Ain't got nothing," he said, meeting the kid's eyes. "Just trying to get somewhere." The kid smirked, but before he could say more, a car horn blared nearby, startling him. Jayden seized the moment, slipping past and ducking into an alley. Sophie's arms tightened around his neck, her breath quickening. "They gone?" she whispered. "Yeah," Jayden said, glancing back. "We're good." He wasn't sure he believed it, but he kept moving, the rain a steady drum against the tarp. His legs burned, and a cough tickled his throat, sharp and raw. He swallowed it down, focusing on Sophie's weight, her trust. He couldn't stop now, not when she was counting on him. By the 4th mile, the city began to shift. The industrial blocks, warehouses, chain-link fences, broken bottles gave way to strip malls and shuttered storefronts. The rain hadn't let up. turning sidewalks into streams and puddles into lakes. Jayden's sneakers were useless now, the soles flapping with each step, his socks heavy with water. His shoulders screamed under Sophie's weight, though she was too light, really, for a kid her age. He adjusted the tarp again, making sure it covered her, even as water ran down his own face, blurring his vision. "You okay back there?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. Sophie's head shifted against his shoulder. "Cold," she mumbled, her teeth chattering. "Are we close?" "Soon," Jayden lied, not wanting to scare her. 6 miles to go, maybe more. He didn't know if he'd guessed the streets right, or if the rain had washed away his sense of direction. But he kept walking 1 block at a time, past a pawn shop with barred windows, a school with a playground empty, except for a lone swing creaking in the wind. A memory hit him, his mom, years ago, holding his hand as they walked to the corner store. "You don't owe nobody your kindness," she'd said, her voice warm despite the chemo's weight. "But you give it anyway. That's what makes you you." Jayden clung to those words now, letting them push him forward when his body wanted to quit. He was tired, hungry, soaked to the bone, but Sophie's small breaths against his neck kept him grounded. She needed him. That was enough. At a gas station, 5 miles in, he stopped under the awning to catch his breath. His shoulders throbbed, and his fingers were numb from gripping the tarp. He leaned against an ice machine, sliding into a crouch, Sophie still on his back. She stirred, her voice raw. "Are we there?" "Not yet," Jayden said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "Just taking a breather." A truck pulled up, its headlights cutting through the rain. The driver, a middle-aged man with a graying beard, stepped out, glancing at them. "You kids okay?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Need a ride?" Jayden hesitated. A ride would be faster, warmer, but he didn't trust it. People didn't help for free, not in his experience, and he couldn't risk someone thinking he'd taken Sophie. "We're good," he said, standing slowly. "Thanks, though." The man frowned, then reached into his cab and tossed over a bottle of water and a granola bar. "Take these, at least. You look like you need 'em." Jayden caught them, nodding. "Appreciate it." The man drove off, and Jayden tucked the supplies into his backpack. He gave Sophie the water, guiding it to her lips, and broke off half the granola bar for her. She ate quietly, her hand shaking. "You sing?" she asked suddenly, her voice small. Jayden blinked, caught off guard. "Not really. Why?" "My dad sings to me sometimes," she said, "when I'm scared." Jayden's throat tightened. He thought of his mom's lullabies, soft and off-key. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. He started humming an old song she'd loved, the words coming slow. "Swing low, sweet chariot." Sophie's head relaxed against his shoulder. And for a moment, the rain didn't feel so heavy. The 6th mile brought a new challenge. A cop car slowed as it passed, its spotlight sweeping over them. Jayden's heart pounded, but he kept his pace steady, head down. The officer rolled down his window. "Hey, kid, where are you headed with her?" "Just taking her home," Jayden said, his voice calm despite the fear clawing his chest. "She's my cousin." The cop studied him, then Sophie, her face hidden under the tarp. After a tense moment, he nodded. "Get her inside soon. Storm's getting worse." Jayden nodded, not daring to breathe until the car pulled away. He coughed then, deep and rattling, the cold settling into his bones. Sophie stirred. "You sick?" she asked, worried. "Nah," he lied, forcing a grin. "Just swallowed some rain." He kept walking, the city blurring around him. Street signs, oak trees, a man with a golden retriever staring as they passed. By the 8th mile, his legs were lead, his breath short, but he could feel it. They were close. The houses were bigger now, the lawns trimmed, the sidewalks clean. A world. Away from his alleys. He tapped Sophie's knee. "Almost there," he whispered, and this time he meant it. The rain fell in curtains, a cold, bone-chilling deluge that turned the world gray and unsteady. Jayden Carter stood before the iron gate of the address he'd carried in his mind for 10 grueling miles, his legs trembling beneath him. Sophie. Miller, still on his back, her small arms loose around his neck, stirred faintly, her breath warm against his soaked hoodie. The tarp he draped over her was sodden now, no match for the storm, but it had kept her from the worst of it. Jayden's own clothes clung to his skin, his sneakers reduced to soggy ruins, and a cough rattled deep in his chest, sharp and persistent. He ignored it, his eyes fixed on the gate, a towering barrier of black metal flanked by 2 brick pillars, beyond which glowed the soft yellow light of a 3-story mansion. This was it. Sophie's home. He shifted Sophie's weight, his shoulders screaming, and pressed the call box button with a numb finger. Nothing. The speaker crackled faintly, then fell silent. Jayden's heart sank. He pressed again, harder, leaning closer. "Come on," he muttered, rain dripping from his hair. The street was empty, the oak trees lining the sidewalk swaying in the wind, their leaves scattering like lost thoughts. He was about to try a 3rd time when Sophie stirred, her voice raw. "Is this home?" "Yeah," Jayden said, forcing certainty into his tone. "We're here." Before he could press again, the speaker buzzed, and a man's voice deep. Urgent cut through. "Who is this?" Jayden leaned in, his voice hoarse. One found her. Sophie. I found Sophie." A pause, heavy and electric, then the speaker clicked off. Jayden waited, his breath shallow, until the gate creaked and began to slide open. He stepped forward, crossing the slick driveway, Sophie's weight a quiet anchor against his back. The mansion loomed ahead, its wide windows spilling light onto the cobblestone path. The front door swung open before he reached the steps, and a tall man in a dark gray suit rushed out, his face a mask of disbelief and relief. Behind him came a woman in a housecoat, her hair loose, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Man in white glove staff. Jayden guessed hovered in the doorway. Wide-eyed Jayden knelt on the dry marble of the porch, easing Sophie down. She wobbled, her bare feet unsteady, then tilted her head toward the voices. "Daddy?" she whispered, her unseeing eyes searching the air. The man James Harrison. Jayden would later learn dropped to his knees, his arms wrapping around Sophie so tightly it seemed he'd never let go. "Baby," he choked out, his voice breaking. "My baby." The woman, Emily Harrison, fell beside them, sobbing, her hands brushing Sophie's matted curls, her bruised arms, as if checking she was real. "Oh, Sophie," she whispered, over and over, her voice a raw prayer. Jayden stepped back, water pooling around his feet, his hoodie heavy with rain. His chest ached, not from the cold or the cough, but from the scene before him. Sophie was home. She was safe. That was all that mattered. He raised a hand halfway, as if to say something, but the words didn't come. The staff member ushered the family inside, and the door began to close. Jayden turned, his sneakers squelching, and walked back into the storm. The rain swallowed him as he retraced his steps down the quiet street, the mansion's glow fading behind him. His legs moved on instinct, carrying him past manicured lawns and silent houses, back toward the city's grittier pulse. He didn't look back. He never did. The cold had settled deep now, his cough sharper, but he pushed it down, focusing on the rhythm of his steps. Sophie's face, small, trusting, biting into that sandwich like it was a miracle, stayed with him, a flicker of warmth in the gray. He found shelter 5 blocks away, under the awning of a bus stop with no bench. Just the MP concrete and a plexiglass wall streaked with rain. He sank against it, pulling his knees to his chest, the tarp long gone, his hoodie a second skin. The cough came again, deep and wet, and he pressed his elbow to his mouth, tasting salt and rain. He figured he'd rest here a bit, then head downtown. There was a church near the overpass that sometimes left food bags by the back door. Maybe he'd find a dry shirt, too. He didn't think about the mansion, or the man who'd knelt in the rain, calling his daughter's name like she was the only thing in the world. That part of the story was over. Jayden was used to walking away before questions started. What he didn't know was that the questions had already begun inside the Harrison mansion. Chaos had given way to a trembling quiet. Sophie, wrapped in blankets, sat on a plush couch, her temperature checked by a doctor who'd arrived within minutes. Her bruises were documented, her cuts cleaned, but her eyes cloudy, unseeing stayed fixed on nothing. Emily sat beside her, brushing her curls with shaking fingers, whispering, "Thank you," though Sophie didn't know who it was for. James paced the wide hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and tight. "No, we don't know his name. He left before we could stop him." Black, teen, maybe 16 thin, wore a hoodie. Came through the storm with her on his back. He ended the call and turned to Michael Reed, the assistant who'd answered the gate. "How the hell did she end up 10 miles away?" James asked, his voice sharp, barely containing his anger. Michael looked down, his face pale. "Sir, the day she disappeared, I took her to West End Park. She loves the swings. I stepped away for a minute, literally a minute, to take a call. When I turned back, she was gone. I searched everywhere, called the police." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to." James stepped closer, his jaw tight. "She's blind, Michael. A minute is a lifetime." Michael's eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. The weight of what could have happened hung heavy, like smoke in the air. James sighed, rubbing his temple. "Get the security footage from the gate," he said. "Find out where he went." Emily joined them, her face streaked with tears but resolute. "He saved her, James," she said softly. "That boy, he carried her 10 miles in this storm. We have to find him." James nodded, his anger giving way to something else, gratitude maybe, or guilt. He glanced at Sophie, now sipping warm milk, her small hands steady for the first time in days. The doctor had confirmed she was dehydrated, malnourished, but alive. Alive because of a stranger who'd vanished into the rain. Later, in the study, James and Emily watched the security footage. The grainy image showed Jayden stepping back from the porch, water streaming off him as Sophie reached for her father. His face was blurred, but his posture hunched, exhausted, yet somehow steady burned. Into their minds. Emily's hand covered her mouth. "He didn't even ask for anything," she whispered. James's voice was firm. "We're finding him." Back at the bus stop, Jayden coughed again, his throat raw. He closed his eyes, leaning his head against the plexiglass, the rain a steady lullaby. He didn't know Sophie's story, not fully. Not yet. But as he drifted toward sleep, he remembered her voice, small but clear. "Daddy." She was home. That was enough. What he couldn't know was that Sophie, tucked into her bed upstairs, had told her parents everything she could remember. The sandwich, Jayden's story about the girl who heard colors, the way he'd carried her through the rain. And what she hadn't said, what she couldn't yet, was the truth about her disappearance. Not just a careless moment at the park, but a man who'd grabbed her, promising candy, then driven her somewhere loud and cold. She'd escaped, running blindly until her feet bled, hiding in alleys until Jayden found her. That story would come. Later, when she was ready. For now, she slept, dreaming of a boy who'd been her ears, her map, her home for a night. And in the city, a search had begun not for Sophie this time, but for the boy who'd brought her back. The Harrison mansion smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee, a world so alien to Jayden Carter that he felt like an intruder every time he crossed its threshold. 2 weeks had passed since he'd walked away from their porch, soaked and shivering, expecting never to see Sophie Miller or her family again. Yet here he was, standing in a guest room that was now his crisp white sheets on a real bed, a desk with a lamp that didn't flicker, a window overlooking a lawn so green it looked painted. His backpack, patched and faded, sat in the corner, a stubborn reminder of the alleys he'd left behind. Jayden ran a hand over his new sweatshirt, soft and clean, and coughed into his sleeve. The sound still raw, but fading thanks to the antibiotics Emily Harrison had insisted he take. He was healing, but fitting into this life felt harder than carrying Sophie 10 miles through a storm. It had started with James Harrison finding him at the bus stop, crouched under a soggy cardboard sheet, his cough worse than he'd let on. James had crouched to his level, offering a thermos of hot tea and words Jayden hadn't expected. "You don't belong on a sidewalk. Come with us." Jayden had resisted at first, his instinct screaming that nothing came free. People didn't just give you a home. Not people like the Harrisons, with their marble floors and private doctors. But James's voice was steady, not pitying, and Emily's eyes held a gratitude that felt real. Sophie's small voice, calling him Jayden from her hospital bed, had sealed it. He'd taken James's hand, unsure but willing to try now. He stood in the mansion's kitchen, watching Sophie at the breakfast table, her unseeing eyes bright with mischief as she tried pouring orange juice. The glass tipped, juice splashing onto the tablecloth, and she giggled. "Oops," she said, reaching for a napkin. Jayden stepped forward, guiding her hand to the spill, his own smile soft. "You're gonna need a bigger napkin, Soph." He teased Emily, stirring cream into her coffee, watched them with a warmth that made Jayden's chest ache. "You're good with her," she said. "She hasn't laughed like this since, well, before." Jayden shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "She's easy to hang with." But it wasn't all easy. The Harrisons had given him everything: clothes, a bed, enrollment at a private school with manicured fields, and kids who smelled like expensive cologne. Yet Jayden felt like he was walking a tightrope. At school, whispers followed him down the halls. "Who's the new kid? Heard he was homeless. That he's here for the money." A boy in his math class, Ethan, had leaned over during a quiz and muttered, "What did you do, scam the Harrisons?" Jayden had clenched his pencil, saying nothing, but the words stung. He wasn't here for money. He hadn't asked for any of this. But doubt crept in late at night, when the mansion's silence was too loud. What if they're right? What if I don't belong? The staff didn't help. Michael Reed, the assistant who'd lost Sophie at the park, watched Jayden with a wary eye, his guilt twisting into suspicion. Once, when Jayden grabbed an apple from the kitchen, Michael had asked, "You sure you're allowed to take that?" Jayden had put it back, his face burning, and eaten nothing that night. He knew Michael's mistake, turning away at the park, had cost him the family's trust. But it didn't make the man's coldness easier to bear. Sophie was his anchor. She'd seek him out after school, her small hand finding his arm, her voice bubbling with stories about her day. "Miss Clara read us a book about a dragon today," she'd say, her teacher's name a coincidence that made Jayden think of the bakery owner who'd left him bread. Sophie called him Big Brother. Now, the words slipping out one evening when she'd hugged him goodnight. It had caught Jayden off guard, his throat tight as he'd ruffled her curls. "You're stuck with me, Soph," he'd said, meaning it. But the world outside wasn't as kind. A week ago, a local tabloid had run a story. Homeless teen exploits. Missing girl for reward? The article twisted everything, claiming Jayden had kept Sophie hidden to demand money, ignoring the 10-mile walk, the sandwich he'd given her, the tarp he'd used to shield her. It spread online, comments piling up. "He's a con artist." Typical. James had been furious, calling the paper's editor himself, but the damage was done. At school, Ethan had waved his phone, the article's headline glowing. "This you, Carter?" Jayden had walked away, his fists clenched, but the words followed him home. That night, he'd sat on his bed, staring at his backpack, tempted to leave. He didn't belong here, not with the whispers in the headlines. But Sophie's giggle from the next room stopped him. She needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed her. The turning point came at a press conference James organized to set the record straight. The Harrisons stood on a podium outside their law firm's office, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling. Jayden stood off to the side, his new sneakers feeling too stiff, his heart pounding. James spoke first, his voice steady. "Our daughter is home because of Jayden Carter. He walked 10 miles in the storm to bring her back, asking for nothing in return. He's not a con artist. He's family." Emily stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "We've spent weeks searching for Sophie, offering rewards, hiring investigators. But it was Jayden, a boy with nothing, who found her, fed her, carried her home. We owe him everything." Sophie, holding Emily's hand, spoke last, her voice small but clear. "Jayden told me a story about a girl who heard colors. He was my ears when I was lost. He's my brother now." The crowd went quiet, the cameras still. Jayden blinked fast, his throat burning. For the first time, he felt seen, not as a shadow, but as someone who mattered. The reporters' questions came after, but James shut them down, guiding the family, and Jayden back inside. Later, Jayden returned to his old neighborhood, needing to close a chapter. He found Clara, the bakery owner, sweeping her shop steps. Her face lit up when she saw him, her gray hair tucked under a scarf. "Look at you, cleaned up," she said, her voice warm. "Heard you're a hero now." Jayden shook his head, handing her a bag of fresh rolls he'd bought with his first allowance. "Just wanted to say thanks for the bread, for not chasing me off." Clara's eyes softened. "You were always a good kid, Jayden. Don't let nobody tell you different. Go live that new life. You earned it." He nodded, the weight in his chest lighter. As he walked back to the mansion, the city's pulse felt different, not welcoming, but less hostile. He wasn't invisible anymore. That evening, at dinner, Sophie reached for the orange juice again, spilling it as usual. Jayden laughed, grabbing a napkin, and James joined in, his deep chuckle filling the room. Emily watched them, her smile quiet, but full. Jayden caught her eye, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He was still learning this life school, trust, belonging, but with Sophie's hand brushing his, he felt something new, hope. The morning sun filtered through the Harrison mansion's wide windows, casting golden patches across the kitchen table where Sophie Miller sat, her small hands fumbling with a glass of orange juice. Jayden Carter, now 17, leaned back. In his chair across from her, his new sneakers tapping the floor, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sophie tipped the glass too far, as she always did, and juice splashed onto the tablecloth, a bright stain spreading like a tiny sunrise. She giggled, her unseeing eyes crinkling with mischief. "Oops," she said, reaching for a napkin that wasn't there. Jayden laughed, a sound he was still getting used to, and slid a napkin toward her. "You're gonna flood the place one day, Soph," he teased, guiding her hand to the spill. Emily Harrison, stirring sugar into her coffee at the counter, turned with a smile, her eyes soft with a warmth that had become familiar. James Harrison, flipping through a tablet at the table's head, chuckled deeply, the sound filling the room like a steady heartbeat. This was their routine, now messy, imperfect, but theirs. For Jayden, it was a world he'd never dared imagine. One where he wasn't just surviving, but living. 3 months had passed since he'd carried Sophie 10 miles through a storm, since he'd walked away from this house expecting to fade back into the city's shadows. Now, he was part of it, part of them. His room upstairs held a school bag, a stack of textbooks, and a framed photo of his mom, her smile joined by a new picture. Him, Sophie, James, and Emily at a park, Sophie grinning on a swing. He still kept his old backpack in the closet. Its patched fabric a reminder of who he'd been. He wasn't that boy anymore, not entirely, but he hadn't forgotten him either. Sophie's voice broke his thoughts. "Jayden, tell me about the dragon again," she said, her juice-sticky fingers tapping the table. She loved the stories he made up, especially the one about a dragon who guarded a girl who heard colors. It had started as a way to calm her that first night in the alley, but now it was their ritual. "All right," Jayden said, leaning forward. "So, the dragon, she's got scales that shine like stars, right? And she flies the girl to a mountain where the wind sings her favorite song." As he spoke, he watched Sophie's face light up, her head tilting as if she could hear the wind herself. Emily sat beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead, and James set his tablet down, listening with a quiet smile. This was what Jayden hadn't known. He needed a family, not just in name but in the small moments, the spills and stories and laughter. Later that day, they drove to West End Park, the place where Sophie had vanished months ago. The swings creaked gently in the breeze, and Jayden pushed Sophie on one, her laughter rising as she soared. Higher. She squealed, her bare feet kicking the air. Jayden grinned, his hands steady on the chains. This was where her nightmare had started, a stranger luring her away. A car ride to a place she couldn't describe, her blind escape through streets she didn't know. She'd told the full story weeks ago, in halting whispers to a therapist. Then to her parents. The police were still searching for the man, but Sophie was healing, her smile brighter each day. Jayden, too, was healing, not just from the cough that had lingered after the rain, but from years of being invisible dot. As Sophie swung, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Jayden, you're the one who heard my colors, aren't you?" He paused, his throat tight. "Yeah, Soph," he said finally. "And you heard mine." She smiled, a small, knowing thing, and Jayden pushed the swing again, the park's green expanse stretching around them. For the first time in his life, he felt rooted, like he belonged, not just to a place, but to people who saw him. That evening, Jayden and Sophie joined the Harrisons at a local charity event. One James had organized to fund shelters for homeless youth. The story of Jayden's journey had spread, not the tabloids' lies, but the truth, shared through a viral video of the security footage. A blurry boy stepping back from the porch, Sophie reaching for her father. It had inspired donations, volunteers, even a city council proposal for better outreach programs. At the event, Jayden spoke briefly, his voice steady despite the crowd. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just saw someone who needed help. Anybody would have done the same." The applause was warm, but it was Sophie's hand squeezing his that mattered most. She whispered, "Not anybody. You." This story of Jayden and Sophie is more than a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of compassion in a world that often looks away. Jayden, a boy with nothing, gave everything to a stranger, not for reward, but because it was right. His journey reminds us that kindness doesn't need a price tag, and that even in the coldest cities, human connection can spark hope. Sophie's trust, her resilience despite trauma, shows us the strength of the human spirit, even in its smallest forms. Together, they teach us that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to stand by you, to carry you through. The lesson here is simple but profound. See the invisible. Notice the people society overlooks, the kids in alleys, the shadows on sidewalks. A sandwich, a story, a hand to hold. These small acts can change lives. Jayden's choice to help Sophie didn't just save her. It saved him too, giving him a home and a purpose. Let's carry that forward, choosing kindness over indifference, Connection over division. If this story moved you, join us at Legacy Stories, where we share tales of courage, compassion, and hope. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and become part of a community that believes in the power of human connection. Together, we can amplify these stories and inspire change, one act of kindness at a time.